Paul Campbell is a realtor from Canada who has an exceptionally curious approach to finishing things. He is a cheat, truth be told. He never fixes or revises the properties he is going to sell and simply covers them with different items. Tragically for Paul, a large portion of his clients find out about the misleading and leave inside the initial 5 minutes. This has made him an extremely ineffective realtor, in light of which he and his family are compelled to carry on with an exceptionally unobtrusive existence with no extravagance at all. Seems like a Canadian to me. At some point, as he gets back after working all day, he discovers that his darling uncle died. On one hand, Paul is crushed by the misfortune, yet then again, he is delighted, as the uncle was a mogul with no different family members. This implies that Paul will acquire all his property. Notwithstanding, when he meets his uncle's legal advisor, he discovers that the elderly person really gave all of his abundance to good cause. All he left for his nephew was a little plant. Disappointed and irritated, Paul brings the plant with him and heads back home. The following morning, during breakfast, Paul is still feeling awful. He chastens his children for burning through an excessive amount of cash when actually, they have scarcely burned through $20 this week. It is uncovered that Paul has never given them pocket cash, on account of which they have begun despising him. That is not even enough for a fortnight skinfather. After breakfast, Paul clears a storeroom in his patio and spots the plant there. He is as yet irate at his uncle, yet additionally chooses to extend some regard by watering the plant. What's more, when he does as such, shockingly, a $100 note jumps out of it. Paul rapidly culls it out and gazes at it in dismay. This is the point at which he understands that the plant is certainly not a conventional one, however a genuine cash plant. As Paul attempts to figure out more about it, his family abruptly shows up there. Be that as it may, rather than showing them his new find, he changes the point and sends them away. It is evident that he doesn't believe his family should learn about his cash plant. The next day, when Paul gets back from work, he anxiously heads to the store space to check, assuming that the plant has developed more cash. To his enjoyment, a huge number of dollars are swinging from the plant. Along these lines, Paul keeps reaping cash from the plant, while likewise concealing it from his own loved ones. At some point, an elderly person named Tim shows up at the entryway. Professing to be his departed uncle's closest companion, he demands a little gift for his association, and Paul, who is in a very positive mindset, thinks of him a check for $1,000. This amazements the family, and when Tim leaves, they stand up to Paul about his newly discovered abundance. Notwithstanding, rather than uncovering everything sincerely, he indeed lies, saying that he has been selling a ton of properties lately. As the days pass, Paul turns into a rich individual. He has now begun wearing architect garments, dumping his exhausted and worn-out outfit. He additionally gives the two his kids $200 as pocket cash. Presently we can purchase a genuine decent game. This establishes an extremely blissful climate in the house without precedent for years. In the following scene, we see a completely changed Paul. He no longer thinks often about frivolous money and is continuously searching for ways of expenditure more cash. In one occurrence, he purchases a costly yard trimmer, in spite of the fact that his home doesn't have a very remarkable grass. In another instance, when his work colleague, Jack, makes fun of his old car, Paul gets angry and ends up buying a sports car. However, he makes the mistake of paying everything in cash, because of which the car dealer becomes suspicious, believing that Paul is involved in illicit activities. He quickly informs the police about it. Car dealers are snakes. They would never do that. Soon Detective Miller arrives at the scene and takes all the information she can from the car dealer. When she puts two and two together, She also deduces that Paul is involved in illegal stuff, so she makes it her mission to catch him red-handed. Meanwhile, Paul heads to his workplace and shows off his expensive car to Jack. "And you thought I had a small TP, Jack." When the latter inquires how he could afford it, Paul says that his uncle left him a lot of money as an inheritance. Following this, he heads home and surprises his family with a car. While the children are over the moon with the new purchase, his wife, Grace, starts becoming suspicious. She requests Paul to honestly tell her about the source of income, but just like the last time, he ignores her. Over the course of the next few days, Grace continues asking the same question, but Paul always finds a way to ignore her. This causes the couple to have minor arguments. One morning, the old man Tim once again shows up outside, requesting a donation. However, Paul, who is now in a bad mood, sends Tim's ass away rudely. After he leaves for the office, Detective Miller arrives at the house and interrogates Grace. She inquires about her husband's line of work, and despite all the arguments, as of late, Grace defends Paul. She mentions that he is an honest and hardworking real estate agent who has never done anything illegal. Realizing that she will not get any help from his family, Detective Miller decides to take matters into her own hands. She conducts a thorough research on Paul's profile and learns that he hasn't made a single sale in the last month. This makes her even more sure that he is involved in something wrong. Meanwhile, Paul's life starts spiraling out of his hands because of the constant nag he suffers at the hands of his wife. Grace demands to know where he gets all his money, and slowly but steadily, even she starts doving his conscience. To make matters worse, the plant also stops giving out cash. Assuming that someone has cursed him, Paul hands out money to all the people who may think badly of him. He also goes to Tim's office and gives him a huge donation. He simply wants to lift the curse so that his plant can once again start functioning. But Tim, who has been impressed by the real estate agent's attitude, shares with him some words of wisdom. He asks Paul to share his wealth with the ones in need, claiming that it will bring him happiness and satisfaction. Paul likes the idea, and to start off with, he dumps some more money on the desk before leaving. Unfortunately, just after a few minutes, Detective Miller arrives at the scene and notices the large amount of cash lying on Tim's table. This makes her assume that the old man is an associate of Paul and that both of them are dealing in illicit stuff. That night, a sleepless Paul heads to the storeroom and tries every possible way to revive the plant. At one point, he even reads the Holy Bible, hoping that God will help him out. Unfortunately, all his efforts are in vain. The next morning, Paul heads to a cafe and buys a takeaway coffee for himself. On the way out, he runs into a homeless man and gives him a $100 bill to continue his Good Samaritan gimmick. He also gives away his coffee to make sure the man doesn't stay thirsty. Unfortunately, right after he leaves, Detective Miller again shows up. She spots the homeless man with the cash and assumes that he is helping Paul distribute narcotics in the area. Hence, she apprehends him without giving him a chance to speak. Elsewhere, we learn that Paul was supposed to attend his son's all-important football match. But as usual, he left home without informing anyone. This has left his son very disappointed and angry. Currently, Grace is trying her best to contact Paul, but he just won't pick up. When nothing works, she, along with her daughter, Carrie, head to Paul's factory to look for him. The place is dark and gloomy with no signs of any workers around. As Carrie enters a shady-looking room, she accidentally falls through a hole that had been covered by a cloth. Turns out, Paul was supposed to fix it, but he simply hid the hole to save time. Now his own daughter has paid the price for his negligence. In the next scene, we are taken to the hospital where it is revealed that Carrie has suffered a fractured arm. Paul's colleague, Jack, is furious at him for always slacking at work and being reckless. He almost ends up punching him, but backs out at the last moment and leaves. Later, Paul also realizes his mistake and starts weeping in front of his wife. All his life, he has used shortcuts when he should have done things in a better way. This is the only reason his family has always been on the back foot. Being the good wife that she is, Grace forgives him for everything and asks that he start anew. That night, Carrie is finally discharged from the hospital, and everyone finally breathes a sigh of relief. Paul also makes amends with his son by promising to always be by his side and never abandon him again. He has now finally realized that family is more important than anything else in the world. Paul promises to be a better person from now on. However, the very next morning, Detective Miller arrives outside his home and arrests him. As Paul is taken to jail, he is shocked to see the homeless person from earlier. Tim is also there, and he finally reveals everything. He mentions that he knows about the money plant. In fact, he was the one who discovered it in the first place. When Paul's uncle was going through a hard time, Tim gave him the money plant, hoping it would solve his problems. However, the exact opposite happened. With more money, there came more greed, and Paul's uncle started falling into an even dangerous hole of depression. But with some guidance and counseling, he totally turned his life around. He started using all his wealth to help those in need, and this ultimately made him happier. Then he died. After Tim finishes narrating his story, he urges Paul to do the same, that is, to always help others around him. A while later, all three of them are surprisingly released from jail. It turns out that Jack told the authorities that he and Paul became massively rich after they sold a large property in New York. But in reality, it was only Jack who conducted the whole deal. He simply lied to the cops to save his friend. With this, Detective Miller is left with no evidence against Paul, so she stops investigating him once and for all. You heard it, kids. If you get in trouble for lying, just lie again. The following day, Tam's organization holds a small function, and Paul's entire family is invited. Turns out to be a homestay for orphan children who have no one to look after them. Tim was collecting the donations to help continue this project. Soon Paul is invited on stage, and with all the experiences he has had, he delivers an emotional speech. At first, he declares that he will sell his sports car and donate all the funds to the organization. He also vows to always help the children in one way or another, earning himself a round of applause from all the attendees. In particular, his family and Jack are greatly impressed. In the final scene, we see Paul and his family heading out for a vacation. As of now, he doesn't have a lot of cash like he used to when the money plant was delivering, but at least he is happy, and that's all that matters. Paul shakes hands with Tim and returns him the money plant as he knows now the actual value of life. He then gets into his car and drives away with his family, making for a happy ending. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.